All right. Welcome to episode 11 of the Real Takes Tennis podcast. We have as many episodes as Gael Monfils does have titles. I was trying to figure out some fun way to start this off. And I was like, I wonder how many, because Medvedev in his US Open speech was talking about, yeah, I have 20 titles. Novak has 24 Grand Slams. I was like, how many, titles do like people have as we do like number of episodes? And I was like, oh shit, Gael Monfils has 11 titles. I was thinking about that obviously because of the new UTS episode that came out, which we can talk about later too, but just a great conversation and glad tennis is getting more publicity in general. So that was a fun little tidbit to start us off. And I mean, obviously, like Gael is at the tail end of his career, but some of the stuff that he's talking about in his podcast, which was so illuminating, like you forget how good the guy was and how close he was to making like a Grand Slam final. And one of the points that he made, which was super interesting, was just like if you think about who won during his time, right? The Australian, the French, Wimbledon, and the US Open, it was Roger, Rafa, like Novak, Andy. Like the only people who didn't win, who won majors during that time was like Chilich, Stan, like
And Murray.
well, Murray, that's it, right? And like Murray is like a legend in his own right. So it was like the opportunity was very, very slim. So he makes some interesting points that I agree with, some of them that I disagree with too. And I think like Patrick also challenges him a little bit on his mentality of like there wasn't a chance, right? Like he was like, no, you had the pieces, you had the complete game. And so that was a very interesting conversation. Have you had a chance to take a look at it or to listen to
I
it?
haven't I haven't
Yeah.
listened yet, but yeah, Gael just off the bat, right? He's a guy who kind of seemed to prioritize the entertainment value of tennis, which I totally respect, perhaps over winning sometimes. Needless to say, I mean, the guy had so much talent. He's still, to your point, got 11 titles, was in
Yeah.
contention for perhaps a Grand Slam or getting to the finals of a slam. So,
Yeah.
uh, you know, no dissing him.
Yeah, no dissing. I just the only thing I would challenge him on is like as Patrick kind of did also, just like you have the complete game and there are guys who reached the finals and won that you could also put yourself in contention for. Like I understand you're not going to beat the best guys every day, but one of the things we'll talk about with just like winning in general, right? Is like you just have to put yourself in position to be successful and something good will happen, right?
Yeah,
Like
and it's funny
anything
because
will happen.
we were talking about this exact debate, right? Of like, is Djokovic's competition harder
Yeah.
now than it was 10 years ago? And is he playing better now than he was 10 years ago? Would he beat
Yeah.
a version of himself now versus 10 years ago? And I think it's such a hard question because, I mean, in a lot of respects, he has improved his game. The competition, it's really tough to say if it's gotten harder or easier because you've got guys like Gael, Berdych, Roddick, as we said, other people
Yeah.
that were in the hunt. And now we've got kind of a different crop of players. So not sure what the answer is there.
Yeah, if you ask Tony Nadal, Tony was like, "Yeah, the past generation was just significantly harder than the current generation." I was like, I mean, maybe that's true, but it feels also just a little, why are you
Biased.
shitting on the like why are you shitting on the current generation? Like they're balling, they're like trying hard too. I don't think that they're just like giving it to or like giving up. So yeah, I don't know. It's a little biased, but yeah, we've got a really good one for you today. A lot of different topics that we want to talk about. Obviously, we're recording this right after our conversation with Big Chris, as well as right after the U.S. Open final. Maybe just quick point on the episode with Chris before we dive into some of the topics we want to talk about. Really good conversation. I mean, you can tell like he's very articulate in a lot of the things that he's thought about in terms of his journey and how he got to where he's at right now, right? And it just also just goes to show that like we a lot of us have very similar tennis journeys, but I mean he's almost kind of living the dream in the sense, right, of like traveling the world, playing matches, playing tennis, and it almost gives you something to strive for and something to work for. So it was a really good conversation and good to talk to him.
Yeah, it was refreshing to hear this take of like, there's a door and you can just open it if you want to
Yeah,
play pro tennis. You
yeah,
don't have to take these crazy risks. I mean, granted, he did really well for himself financially, but There are ways to achieve your dreams that are maybe a little bit more outside the box. And I think too many people think this is like a binary decision.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, the way he described it was like just so obvious, right? Everything led, he always had this vision and he was going to do whatever it took. And even if, you know, he's going to continue battle for that ATP point, continue battling to get to the top 1,000, etc. Um, the reality is he's already achieved his dream by getting to play, against the top guys in these ITFs and futures tournaments.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I mean, we didn't get to ask him this question, right? But if you had told him as a junior when he was like a 1 star, hey, you have a chance to play like futures events and potentially get an ATP point, he'll sign that contract right then and there, right? For the like, I'm sure he would. So, yeah, it's well, hopefully we're rooting for him. Hopefully he'll have a chance to get that ATP point, and then we can play him and hopefully take a game and say that we've taken a game off, bro.
I don't know. It
Yeah.
was funny how he was so hesitant to say that I wouldn't be able to take a game off a pro, and I was like, dude, no, 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 that's you're supposed to say that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool, awesome. I guess like maybe transitioning over into the first topic we wanted to talk about. Vice or Vox released this great video that's talking about tennis and why it's so hard to make a living on the pro tour, right? And this speaks to a lot of what we've been researching and looking into over the past couple of weeks on how difficult it is to sustain a living on the pro tour. One of the things Djokovic said in his press conference was like, "I take this profession very, very seriously," right? And that's like a very interesting choice of words to use. That like, no matter how much this guy's achieved, no matter how much he's going to continue redefining the books, he looks at it as a job also. And he is, I mean, you can just see the videos of his pre-match preparation before the U.S. Open, how meticulous he is with everything. And I mean, he's one of the he's fortunate to have achieved what he has achieved, right? And that's not the case for a lot of other people who are very, very good, but don't have the chance to win that type of money, right? And so we wanted to do a deep dive on how we can potentially reinvent and or change the way that players can potentially earn more on the tour. And we have defending his PhD thesis here, a deep dive, a deep dive on that. So any context that I'm missing here that you think would be appropriate?
No, just a couple ads. One thing, Djokovic also came out and talked about comparing tennis with other sports in terms of the number of people that make a living. And he talked about how there are literally 400 men
Yeah.
and women across singles, doubles, and mixed doubles that can make a living off the sport. And that pales in comparison to the contracts that you see in the NBA and the NFL and baseball and other sports. So I think, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think we just, again, need to define what is a professional tennis player, whether it's a percentage of the total number of players that need to make a livable wage or a raw number, whether it's 500 or 600. I think that needs to be determined because without, again, taking the eat what you kill mentality. So I think there's a way to do that. Again, as P said, I'm going to attempt to defend this PhD thesis in the next 20 minutes with a soliloquy, but I would definitely say if I were going to college right now, this is 100% the topic that I would choose to write about and talk about the economics of tennis and perhaps recommendations on better allocation methodologies. And one other thing I'll point out just about Djokovic, we had one of our buddies who had full access at the US Open, let's just say, as his player's physio. And so he got a chance to actually roam through the players' lounge, eat with the players, etc. And guess who's never in that players' lounge eating the buffet is Novak Djokovic, right? This is a guy who, regardless of whether you got Gordon Ramsay preparing those meals, Djokovic is going to be at his Airbnb, God knows where, getting fresh food from a farm and eating his gluten-free meals. So meanwhile, Medvedev's slamming buffets apparently and cursing out the TVs for playing his Australian Open match.
That's absolutely hilarious. That Medvedev is cursing the TVs for playing that. Honestly, if I was a player and I saw myself getting like waxed, I'd be like, dude, you fucking kidding me? Like, don't show this shit. Show the
Yeah,
matches that are going on right now.
exactly. Our friend was like, it was so funny to see every single TV showing live tennis, and then one of them was just conveniently showing, for whatever reason, maybe it was to get in his head, just like a match where he got absolutely destroyed from
That's too
8 months
funny.
ago.
If I actually recall that Novak stays in Jersey during the U.S. Open because he doesn't like
Mm,
being in the city during that time, and
smart man.
viewers were able to find a footage or like a image of where he stays, and I think he's staying at like one of his friend's house, and this friend has like an indoor tennis court, a grass court, and a clay court, so it's like a nice little tennis getaway from the city where he's able to prepare and just chill, and so that's that. I mean, again, that's the perk of being Novak, right? So
And it
I
worked.
think yeah, it worked. He did what he had to do, but we'll talk about that later. I think final thing just to set the stage of the PhD thesis is one of the interesting stats that the Vox video showed was Carlos Alcaraz has made the most last year, and that was $10 million. Like the best player in the world made $10 million, right? And prize money. And you look at the best players in the world. I mean, I think yes, it was just announced recently. Like Joe Burrow became like the highest paid NFL player, right? And like he got 265 million over 5 years. And so
Absolutely ridiculous.
yeah, I mean
Does that
that's
guy
a
even have a chip?
Joe does not have a chip, but he's still a bad man. He's still Joe Chill.
Get out
So
of here. Get out of here. He doesn't even have a chip and he's making 265.
uh, but that just sets the stage that even the best players in the world are making a fraction of what the best players in the world in other sports are. So
And I will also caveat that with, obviously, that's 10 million in raw prize money. He
yeah,
has sponsorships, endorsements where
yeah.
that's the majority of his money. But again, with the eat what you kill mentality, your earnings per year are highly variable compared to other sports.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so I think this is a good opportunity now. So just little context, baseline project. We talked about it a couple episodes ago. This really spurred a lot of interest in the tennis, the economics of tennis and the ATP, and how money is distributed across players, who the agents are in terms of how the cash flows. And, it's funny, as soon as we released that episode, I just went on a tear of researching. So I will start with let's define the agents, right? So there's the ATP, there's tournaments, there's broadcasters, sponsors, consumers or people who are going to watch the game, and then players, right? So in terms of the exchange of goods and services, what happens is broadcasters and sponsors pay tournaments in exchange for being able to advertise their products. Consumers pay tournaments for tickets, merchandise, food, etc. Tournaments then have to pay players, but also cover the cost of hosting their events. And then what happens is the ATP gets a cut from all tournaments. So the interesting thing about all of this is, unlike other very, let's say, centralized sports, right? Think NBA, NFL, MLB, right? Where there's this governing body. The ATP actually hardly makes any money. So they're making about $180 million annually, again, likely from these tournament fees. So there's no real governing body, and I don't think the solution of redistribution actually lies with them. So what I suspect is that the tournaments are taking the highest margins for themselves, and that's where the greatest opportunity for redistribution lies. Beyond, we'll go into another sub bullet on broadcasting in a couple minutes. So I'll start with the U.S. Open as an example. 2022 U.S. Open made $472 million, more than Wimbledon, which made 440 million. And I'm actually looking at their P&L right now, the USDA's P&L. They only had $178 million in direct expenses and 65 or $66 million in depreciation. So regardless of whether you include the depreciation or not, these guys are pocketing at least 220, 230 million and just lining their pockets with it, right? Because buried in that direct expense is the prize money, which sounds like a lot, right? 65 million. But compared to the revenue that they're making, it's a fraction. Now, in terms of how that revenue is generated, right? There are a few components. The two main components are one third. This is based on 2017 data, by the way. One third comes from broadcasting. So in 2017, it was 120 out of 350 million, and then one third comes from tickets. That was another 120 mil. Those are the biggest revenue generators. Those are the biggest levers to pull. The reality is obviously you can't really increase the size of a stadium. I mean, maybe that's a 10x thinking thing, right? Where you could increase ticket revenue. But I really think the lever on the revenue side is broadcasting. And I have been vouching for a more perfect price discrimination in streaming for a long time. I think even in our last, I think every episode we end up talking about how shitty the streaming is, whether you have to get Peacock or ESPN Plus or I mean, there's just so many under the sun now that you have to subscribe to, and I think what's going to happen very soon is consumers like myself are going to stop paying for these bundles where 90% of the bundle is not relevant to them. They're going to start paying and demanding more exact customizable bundles for themselves, right? So if I'm a consumer, I'm literally paying for Tennis Channel and I want to watch a couple movies and I want to watch a couple shows. I don't need anything more, anything less than that. For that package, I'm willing to pay $50 to $100 per month, for example, right? And I think when I saw that 120 million in broadcasting revenue from the 2017 US Open's contract with ESPN, I was literally like, if I were a financial analyst, I would blow that number out of the water. I mean, as an example, right, in Wimbledon, Wimbledon had 50 million streams. So if I literally just charged everyone $2 for watching the entire Wimbledon, I would have made $100 million. Now, think about it if I take a tiered approach and give someone a $5 option for a split screen, being able to watch multiple matches, or a $10 option for being able to watch a la carte, all courts. You're blowing that 120 million out of the water. So again, I think perfect price discrimination is the biggest lever to increase the broadcasting revenue pool. And then I think the tournaments are the ones who are pocketing the most margin. And so when we talk about redistribution to the players, those are the two areas to focus on.
And just a couple points here. It's bad when Daniil Medvedev, who is top 5 player in the world, who is a guy who has been like at the top for a couple of years, former world number 1. He himself is saying, I can't get the stream on ESPN. I had to watch on like one of the janky streams. You notice he said that in his press conference. And I mean, you compare this to like the NBA where everyone has access to like League Pass pretty much. Like the own players who make up the league get access to League Pass and can watch any game they want. That's not even true for the ATP. And that's just absolutely crazy. The second point is on your point of like pulling the levers for like ticketing as well. One of the things that we'll talk about in kind of the US Open experience in general, right, is like qualifying to the US Open is free. And if over the 3-week period, the US Open released data that said that there were close to 1 million attendees over the 3-week period of time. I mean, you charge $10 just for like entrance to those qualifying matches, which were incredibly high level. I mean, I enjoyed watching like the last round of qualifying where there's something on the line. Guys are competing so hard. That's another easy lever to easy like money that's coming in, right? And that's how you get more eyes on tennis as well.
And then what that creates is a virtuous cycle of broadcasting demand too, right? Because as we said before the show even started, we should be televising challengers. We should be televising college matches. We should be televising qualifying matches. I mean, these are just untapped revenue streams that, again, will increase the size of the pie that can then be redistributed more fairly.
100%. 100%. And I think it's kind of one thing that we, even both of us, have kind of discovered in this entire process is like this is not like this was kind of difficult to get, right? Like a lot of all the data we're using is obviously public data, but there's very little light shed on uh how revenue and how the profits are being redistributed. And that's like something that should be more publicly
Transparent.
evangelized. Yeah, transparent. Yep.
100%. 100%. So yeah, in terms of, recommendations that we would have, I guess maybe the ATP is not the right body, but maybe it should be at some point. That could be one piece of this recommendation as the ATP becomes a little bit more centralized and powerful. But the tournaments absolutely. I mean, you think the U.S. Open is pocketing 200 mil? That probably goes for the Wimbledon, for the Australian Open, for the French Open, for the Masters tournaments. I mean, these are all tournaments where it's beautiful that the U.S. Open had a pot of 65 million to allocate to the players. But again, when you compare that to the 400, 500 million that they're making, and they might even blow that number out of the water this year too. I wouldn't be surprised if they close in on 600 million this year. Um, that's literally 10%.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for those that say like, oh, tennis isn't like it's not possible for this to be the case in tennis because it's whatever, maybe potentially less boring. That's not even close to true. If I remember like reading golf's revenue was like in the several billions. And I mean, I don't care what anyone says. Like, I think golf is great to watch, but I think tennis is in the same vein of it being like an individual sport, but still extremely like entertaining, right? And almost at a faster pace than golf.
And just to add another kind of add some color to that revenue is the US Open in 2 weeks generates more revenue for the city of New York than the New York Mets and New York Yankees combined annually. So just think about that for a second, guys. 2 weeks, people are flying in from across the world, tapping into hotels, tapping into Airbnbs, tapping into restaurants, staying for multiple nights, attending the tournament for multiple days. This is I saw a number from, I believe it was Forbes, 700-800 million of revenue for the city of New York just in 2 weeks. So, I mean, yeah, you can say golf is $1 billion sport. The US Open is basically $1 billion event. And again, this is happening across, not to mention the tennis season is so long, right? We already said it's happening at the 4 Grand Slams. It's happening. They're generating profits at every single tournament, including, the challenger tournaments. And they only have the opportunity to make more money if they have better broadcasting.
Yeah, no, 100%. We really hope that this is a type of like some type of resolution will kind of take place soon, right? Like you see, I mean, there's a clear reason why Novak and Vasek and guys that are all part of the PTPA are coming together to make something happen, right? Because this is the only sport that's like as global as it is that hasn't experienced some type of legitimate change. And I think one of the things I think this is bound to happen in that there will be some type of resolution soon, but it's almost shocking to me in hindsight that there hasn't been some type of like player strike or anything like that, right? Like you look at guys, and I mean the NBA experienced like a lockout in 2011. I mean, there's been other sports that have experienced this as well, and it's kind of shocking to an extent that it hasn't happened in tennis already, given that how like less their wages already were relative to other sports.
That's such a good point because the players, I think what the league needs to realize is that the players are the wealth, right?
Yep.
And this challenger tournament's not going to happen unless you get a 32-64 size draw, which by the way, it was fascinating to hear Big Chris's story about how popular these events are with being overbooked and then having to play a 10-point tiebreaker to just get into the pre-qualies. I mean, I think the tournaments for now, they have the power because they understand that so few players are making money and like are willing to do whatever it takes to make it. But like you said, it's bound to change. It's unsustainable. And I think if just to circle back too on the baseline project itself, right? I do not think this is going to cut it. You're giving you're subsidizing the top 150, top 200 players who again do not need the extra money per se. We need to think about extending the sport beyond the top 200 to 300, 400, 500, 600 people who, like we've said, it's like Chris said too, once you're top 500, I mean, these are not just college players. These are not
Yeah.
D1 college players. These are players who are seriously contending. And I mean, we saw it a couple of weeks with our boy off the streets of Mountain View, right? I mean, this is a guy who's
Yeah.
370 in the world who's challenging the top dogs. These are legitimate players that should be making a livable wage.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think the final piece before maybe we move on to like a related topic is just if people have differing views on this, or if we somehow missed anything, I mean, we'd love to hear it, right? Because like this is based on entirely like what we've been able to gather from public information, and it would be good to understand why like a better resolution, or why like a lot of the recommendations that we're suggesting haven't been like implemented yet already, right? And so I think that's the one final piece. Anything else we want to close this topic on?
No, nothing for me. I mean, I can speculate maybe on that last question you asked.
Yeah,
I think the reality is that the broadcasters and the streamers still kind of have us by the balls.
yeah,
I mean, they control, and this is also where, there's a lot of legality and legislation involved that is going to be tough to kind of overturn because we all know, I mean, I think everyone kind of knows that they're a monopoly, right? Netflix is in bed with Hulu, which is in bed with Disney Plus, which is in bed with ESPN Plus, whatever, right? They're all packaging bundles with overlapping content, making cheap content that no one really enjoys. I mean, we all know that, you know, I'm going to make up numbers here, but I would venture to say that 1% of the content is watched 99% of the time. So they're ripe for disruption. I think they can cut their costs by stopping the production of cheap and lame content that no one watches and doubling down and increasing their prices on things that people actually watch and making it more customizable. But again, that whole industry in terms of they're also in bed kind of with the government, and copyright and trademarking and things like that. It's gonna be a tough one to overcome, but it's been overcome. We've seen it happen with Spotify and the music industry. There's no reason why we can't have a similar platform solution for streaming.
100%. And this is obviously incredibly wishful thinking, but yeah, we hopefully believe hopefully we won't have to resort to downloading and paying for Peacock in order to watch the French Open next year. But that's obviously incredibly wishful thinking.
That would be a massive L.
Yeah. Cool. That's awesome. This is a great topic. Obviously, something that we're very passionate about, and something that we that has gotten a ton of traction recently, right? And so hopefully we can get some type. Hopefully, there's like a good resolution on this soon. But I think a good transition here is like on one of the points you're making of like US Open being this massively global event. I think I'm obviously in New York and have been here for the past couple of weeks, and I had the chance to go several times over the past 2 weeks. And the most resounding one of the most resounding things that I realized was just like we always think of tennis as being kind of this maybe like underappreciated, unwatched sport. And when you go to these Grand Slams, and especially when you go to the US Open, these guys are rock stars. The place was absolutely packed each and every single day I went. I obviously was able to watch a lot of good matches and watch the matches that I was interested in. But a lot of the good matches, for example, right? Like you're talking Yannick versus Stan, you're talking like Stan versus Echeverry, like really good high quality matches that were placed on the outdoor courts where you can get grounds passes. Where grounds passes can let you watch those matches. The line was through the roof. I mean, it was so long, like you have to almost wait 30 minutes to get it. And so this idea of this like the kind of vibe at the US Open where there's so much energy and so many people are watching it, that like gave me like such a greater appreciation for the sport and what these guys do, because it was an awesome 2.5 weeks.
And I mean, the celebrity sightings were off the charts too.
Off the
Leo showed
charts.
up for the final. I mean,
Yeah.
you got some heavy hitters coming in.
Yeah. You got, I mean, who like Brady,
John Hamm, Brady,
Charlize Theron,
Butler was there the whole time.
the
Jimmy
whole
Butler was there
time.
the whole time.
Yeah. No, it's
Michelle and Barack Obama for the
yeah.
women's final. I mean, it doesn't get higher than that.
not only that, they were there for the first round. My friend was actually sitting next to them, and he was like, trying to take a selfie of sitting next to Barack and Michelle. So that was awesome. I mean, it was an incredible 2 weeks. Obviously, I was fortunate to go a couple times because of Vasil's wild card into the Open, and so he was kind enough to hook it up with tickets. And I mean, it was maybe that's like a great place to start off because we had talked to him a couple episodes ago about getting a wild card to the US, potentially getting a wild card to the Open, right? And uh, it's clear that he belongs. Like he had such a like that he and Dennis Kudla made it to the third round, and it was so clear that at times like Vasil was the best player on the court, right? And I mean they had a ridiculously tough draw first round playing Sebastian Offner and Mueller, who are two singles players. I mean Offner was definitely, you could tell like there's a reason why he's in the top 50. Massive serve, really good ground strokes, like super good player. Then they beat Middlecoop and Pavic, two really good doubles players as well, and then match point in the third match against Krajcek and Dodig, who's again phenomenal double team, right? And that's, I mean, to do that for your first time as a Grand Slam, nerves, thinking, who knows if you think you belong to do that. I mean, that's just remarkable, and it was awesome to watch courtside.
Yeah, and just to add one thing, I mean, with Dodek Krycek, right? This was the team that's won multiple Grand Slams, and they actually also got to the semifinals of the Open itself. So, yeah, I mean, if Vasil and Dennis got through that round, who knows? They could have been
Yeah.
holding the trophy at the end of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just this is the first time I had watched like doubles that closely, I would say, or that I was that invested in doubles since maybe like a couple of years ago. And I mean, it's ridiculous. A lot of what Vasil was saying in terms of you need to be like an elite returner and an elite server in order to have any chance. I mean, it was ridiculous. Like these guys' hands when you don't put a return as far cross court as you want. Like Pavic was cutting off everything so easily. I mean, he barely missed volleys when they were hit right at him, right? And so it was, the level was incredibly high, and I think Bussel's got a great chance to. I mean, he's going to crack top 150 now probably, and he's got a great chance to get direct entry into a lot of the tournaments, or at least get a wild card, which would be great to see.
Absolutely. And this is kind of where the going back to our previous conversation about baseline project too, this is kind of where the unfairness stems where, I mean, you got a guy, he's 220 in the world. He's at the very edge of breaking through. If he didn't have a United States citizenship, he would
Yeah.
not have had this opportunity. And, I mean, you could argue that's kind of unfair because this is a guy who can compete at that level. Um, and what happens is, again, with these types of systems, as soon as you break through, success breeds more success because now you're gaining direct entry. You don't have to fight through qualies, and the gap between the proverbial rich and poor widens.
Yeah, and it's not just that, right? It's also just like the mental state. It's like once you, if it's a lot of the guys have said, like once you get confidence, it's a wrap. And I mean, this is obviously going to do massive, like this is obviously going to be huge for his confidence because he's shown that he can like compete and be there at the highest level. So it was all around a great 2.5 weeks. And I mean, when Krajcek serves 120 down the tee on the ad side in order to save match point, it's tough to be mad at that because that's just, I mean, that's a big time shot. So yeah, it would have been cool to see them in the semifinals potentially.
100%.
Cool. Maybe we transition a little bit over into the the main topic of the US Open, which was again the GOAT doing GOAT things. I mean, 24 majors, dropped two sets on his way to the championship.
Well, three because I know you're right, right? They were
Yeah,
only to Jerry.
no, only to Jerry. And I mean,
That's hilarious.
this guy, I mean, we were talking about this offline, but this guy was maybe 1 or 2 points away from getting a calendar grand slam, right? And it just goes to show, which is another thing I saw in the Open, of just the margin. Like we keep saying this, but the margins are so thin, and like it's funny because I was thinking about this more and more. So it's like all that really matters is winning the right points at the right time. Like as long as you give yourself a chance and as long as you stay in the match, you're gonna have chances for the most part. And Novak was 1 or 2 points away from completing the calendar Grand Slam, which would have, or yeah, calendar Grand Slam, which would have been remarkable. But I think the point that a lot of us wanted to talk about was just it's kind of crazy that we see Medvedev and other returners, right, stand 18 feet beyond the baseline. And this is just absolutely baffling us. And you see Medvedev admit that in the post-match press conferences, like, yeah, maybe I was a little stubborn with my return tactics. I did not adjust very well. And he did move inside, or he did stand a little closer than he did after the first set, right? Which was, I mean, good and probably a reason why that was close. But wasn't good enough because I mean that's slice serve on the deuce
On
side
the news side.
and yeah on the deuce side and Novak serving and volleying a ridiculous amount of times and winning those points a ridiculous amount of times, plus opening up the court with those down the line ground strokes. That was just infuriating. And one final point before I kick it over to you is just like it's funny that I've noticed this more and more so, especially in the open, was that guys were standing so far back. I cannot think of a player that was actually standing close to the baseline. It felt like everyone was standing so far back, and I was just very surprised to see that because I mean I understand like it's coming with a lot of spins, coming with a lot of kick. Maybe you want to give yourself that time, but it just opens up so much of the court, and I just found that really surprising.
Yeah, I do wonder to your last point if that's a function of the speed of the balls in the court now, because I mean, we've discussed this too, right? Where the courts are and balls are just getting faster and faster, and the human reaction times are only so fast.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I mean, let's talk about the tactics of the final because I'm gonna say here confidently that I'm not gonna watch Medvedev next year, unless this off season he works on learning how to hit a return from within 10 feet of the baseline. I mean, the closest that he got to the baseline was on second serve returns. He moved from 11 feet behind the baseline to 9 feet behind the baseline. Um, when it was the most perplexing match that I've ever watched because you've got every single ad point on in the second set lasting 30 to 35 shots, and then you have Djokovic just serving wide and serving and volleying on the deuce side, and that working 21 out of 22, 22 out of 23 times in a set. It's just like how do you not? I mean, Daniil is a smart guy. He has a high tennis IQ. And, I also understand and give him the benefit of the doubt that, he's working on his reaction times. He hasn't quite figured that out. He has long strokes, he has a funky grip. But at some point, you got to stand 5 feet and just try to bunt a return so that you're in the rally. I mean, it was so frustrating to watch every single one of those deuce points, including at 5-all in the second set breaker, right? It's like, what's coming. Djokovic is keeling over. Medvedev did such a great job of battling on those ad points and making him work for every single thing. And, Djokovic said this was like one of the hardest sets he's ever played. But if you're going to lose every single deuce point like that, you're going to lose the set. I'm sorry. The margin of error is too small. You have to find a way to bunt a return, hit an angle, get into a deuce point. Because these were also like these were like Pete Sampras serve and volley situations where it was literally one serve, one volley. I mean, that Djokovic didn't even have to hit a lot of second volleys because there was so much open court.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that we like. I don't recall Novak serving and volleying as much as he has, right? Which A goes to show how good he is at the net, but it also B goes to show like he reacted to that situation immediately. Like this was in the first set, he started serving and volleying almost immediately. And I'm actually kind of surprised to an extent that Medvedev's coach didn't tell him. Maybe he did tell him, but like there was no like change immediately. And one of the other things I was thinking about was like, if you remember, like when Vasil talked to us, right? Like he was talking about Benoit Paire's forehand and how even though guys are going to hit there, where the second shot is going. And so there's an element of that here where, okay, Medvedev knows that, okay, if the ball is going to go out wide on the deuce side, the ball is most likely going to be played there. And maybe there's a chance that if Novak doesn't hit it perfectly, I can get to it. But in this case, it just didn't work out right like that, right? Because Novak hit great volleys and the court is just too much to cover because even if you get that ball, Novak's going to have like an easy second ball to put away.
And Joker's volleys are underrated. We've talked about this, right? I mean, he doesn't
Underrated.
his overhead is definitely like
Sus.
ironically the weakest part of his game, which is ironic because Murray's overhead is also the weakest part of his game. So two of the top four players, I would argue, of all time have like some of the weakest overheads.
Yeah.
But Medvedev's this tactic is going to start working more and more often. It's starting, you're seeing players starting to expose him, right? Eubanks took him to a fifth in Wimbledon, and then Alcaraz demolished him. And that's going to work every year on the grass. He lost to RBA and Halle. Um, People are starting to expose the style, and I think he'll do well on the hard courts because of his ground stroke game. But I anticipate players are gonna, with competent volleys, are gonna continue pushing him and continue challenging the strategy because it's the stubbornness to me is still kind of perplexing.
It 100% is. And here's a strategy question that I was randomly thinking about. I actually think that this is something I've been thinking about more and more. I actually think potentially one of the reasons that players struggle with overheads is because they try and hit it out of the air as opposed to letting it drop. I do what do you think about that? Because I think like it's difficult for if you when you let it bounce, obviously you're letting people get back into the point. But I think it's better to make the overhead because you still have a high percentage of winning the point if you let it bounce and potentially letting them get back into the court as opposed to just taking it out of the air and like shanking. And that's just something I feel like I've noticed. Maybe it's not true. Maybe you should hit it out of the air, but that's just something I've noticed. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really know if there's a lot of data on it per se, but my take on overheads is just like it's all confidence, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there are guys
Yep.
like Roddick, and we saw Ben Shelton too, right? Rafa, Federer. I mean, these guys are not going to let the ball bounce. They just have so much confidence that they can do a scissor step and leap in the air and then rip an overhead as hard as they want into the open court. I feel like that's something that is not practiced a lot. If I
Yeah.
think about, like, we've talked about the blueprint and our training sessions, right? Like I would probably, on in terms of my total time allocation on court, I think I spent 0.1% of my time on overheads. And
Yeah.
I'm positive. I mean, if you go back just a generation to Sampras, Agassi, earlier than that, Becker, these are guys who probably spent maybe training sessions on their overhead. So
Yeah.
that's the type of confidence that you need if you want to make that a 10 out of 10, 100 out of 100 shot.
Definitely. And I mean, I think one of the other reasons we've seen guys like Ben have really good overheads is, I mean, Ben was playing doubles, mixed doubles, and singles in this tournament, right? And he had a deep run in mixed doubles. You all that time at that time at the net, those times hitting overheads when it's like 6-7 in the tiebreak to stay in the match, right? Like those types of reps in high pressure situations will only pay off. And it is very perplexing that Novak's overheads are definitely the weakest part of his game. But hey, if the goat has a flaw in your if has a flaw in his game, I mean we all do too, right? So gives us hope. But no, it was a really good performance, and I think it's crazy that you just saw Novak flat. Like we're always taught, right? Don't show necessarily to your opponent that you're tired, like that you're struggling. This guy just laid down on the ground after long rallies to try and collect his breath, and still, he managed to close it out in straight sets. And talk all you want about how his physical condition during the match. I mean, Medvedev was the one who called the physical trainer for his elbow, right? And even though
Right.
he looked like the fresher guy, and that was just absurd.
Yeah, and I think I've taken a pretty critical stance so far. Obviously, Djokovic getting the Kobe number is crazy, and Medvedev's cardio is off the charts. I mean, I
Off the
don't think I've
charts.
ever seen anyone challenge Djokovic's fitness the way Medvedev did in the second set. So kudos to him for getting that far. I will say I think the second set was close, but I would not call it a close match at the end of the day. It was a straight set win. There were, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there were any set points in the second. So it was still Djokovic absolutely dominating this whole tournament beyond the 2 sets to love scare against
Yeah.
Jerry, which I've said this before. I know it's a controversial take. I think Djokovic powers up in the early rounds of tournaments. He's on gear one, gear two. He's really in a lot of situations. I feel intentionally getting himself into tricky, tight situations where he can bolster his confidence by showing himself that he can get through them. And I mean, when he turned when he flipped the script on Jerry, it was a wash. I mean,
Yeah,
we were putting money on the number of games Jerry would win
yeah,
after dropping the first two sets.
yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely right. And it's funny because I was thinking about do you recall do you have a thought on any other major championship that may have looked as easy as this one was? Like any like a player that just like breezed through the draw and ended up winning a major.
Yeah, Rafa's French Open where he beat Federer 1-3-0 in the finals. I mean, that's the only one that comes to mind immediately. He didn't drop a set. I think he beat Ferrer like 1-1 in the semis or quarters or something like that. So
Yeah.
that that but that's also like a different you can't even
Yeah.
compare Rafa and Clay to anyone else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was gonna say that was one that came to mind, and then Fed at 2007. He didn't drop a set, beat Roddick like a drum 4-2-0 or something like that. I mean, yeah, it's just silly stuff, and yeah, I think we we've already seen what Novak's done this year, and he's looking like the favorite for the Australian Open yet again.
100%. No doubt. I mean, that's the Novak Djokovic annual invitational.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe let's close it off on the on this final topic. Who were some players that you saw maybe in throughout this US Open that you would have to downgrade, or players whose performances didn't really like impress you? I'll kick this off because this is just so fresh in my mind. But
Yeah.
I happen to be very, very close to see Nicola Jerry play Alex de
Oh
Minaur.
my God. Thank you for bringing that up.
And I mean, De Minaur, he just turned into. I mean, he played his. He didn't have to do anything insane. He played his normal game style of getting balls back, forcing it, making things really, really difficult. And Nico at 6'5", with a huge serve, shockingly and surprisingly, played the exact same game style of just hitting it as hard as he can down the middle and didn't make a single adjustment. And there was a reason why it was a complete wash.
That was the most I actually am so glad you mentioned that because that was one of the most frustrating matches I've ever watched in my entire life. I mean, this dude could not make a shot. He literally looked like a scrub. Couldn't get through more than a five ball rally. Uh, I think we had him on like our first team all ATP or honorable
Yeah.
mention for the first half of the year because he did have a really good first half of the year, but the IQ was, I mean, it was negative in this
Yeah.
match. De Minaur just ripped his soul out of his body. I want to comment technically on his backhand too. We started seeing the flaws of that kind of open left hand grip that he has, where his racket is a little bit open face pointed towards the sky rather than perpendicular uh, to the ground. He was miscalibrating everything, missing in the spraying in the net, spraying long, spraying wide, no control over the backhand. He looked like a D3 player next to De Minaur.
Yeah, and I mean, the environment, the arena, like the stadium was ready to pop because there were tons of Chilean fans, and I was able to witness Nico play Alex Mickelson the round before, and I mean, Nico was getting more support than Alex was in New York, right? I mean, the Chilean fans were so rowdy and ready to explode, and it was just it was like the setup, the stage was set, and Nico just did not make adjustments like set in, set out, and yeah, as we said in the group chat, I had him in my parlay of Nico potentially upsetting Alex de Minaur, and he just blew it for me. So that's unfortunate.
So my answer to this question, I'm going to start. I think I might have a few. I'm going to start with Francis Tiafoe. Um,
Mm,
he did end up making going pretty deep, making the quarters, losing to Ben in four. But what we witnessed from that match is Ben looked like the more mature guy. He looked like the
yeah,
guy who was the favorite. And I think
yeah,
Francis looked pretty overwhelmed by the moment and his opportunity to kind of get to another semifinal and potentially go deep in the slam because we know this guy has the potential to beat top guys, but um, Ben looked more sound in that moment, and I was pretty underwhelmed by the quality of
yeah.
that match. I don't think Francis showed what he's capable, made a lot of errors. So pretty disappointing, but really, really happy to see Ben go through, and we're gonna talk more about him, I think, later on.
Ye- Yeah, maybe one final point before we transition over to that part of the conversation. But it was cool. I mean, one of the complaints that I feel like I've noticed, and I mean, Ben made it to the semifinals this year, but I actually saw him lose to Nuno Borges last year, and Nuno's a very good player, very consistent, and I felt like Ben was trying to overpower Nuno, and he did that. He tried to do that at times throughout this tournament as well, right? But one of the things he was able to do really well, or that I thought he was doing better, was he tried to do a better job of keeping balls in play, hitting, heavy, more rally ball type forehands and backhands to the point where when he had like a good setup shot, he would take advantage of it. And I mean, we saw that in the second set or third set when down set point, he hit like an absolutely ridiculous forehand. I don't know if that, I still don't think that was probably the correct shot to play it that far behind the baseline, but I mean, hey, it worked for him. So that's the type of high margin, high risk tennis that Ben is capable of executing and resulting in good results, right? But that's something that I felt like he did a little bit better throughout the tournament. So it was good to see, and I think one of the things he's probably realized over the course of this year and over this tournament is he needs to play to his strengths in order to give him a chance to win, right? And that's using that lefty serve to open up the court really, really well. I mean, still, right? Like at the end of the day, Ben had chances in that third set to be able to win that third set, and that's what we're talking about, right? Of just you have to just find a way to stay in the match as long as you can, and you'll get chances even against the best of the best. And that's something we hope to see more from Ben.
Yep. And I'm might hurt your feelings on this one a little bit, but I'm gonna say, you know what I'm gonna say already.
I know what you're gonna say.
Yannick Sinner losing in the round of 16 to Alexander Zverev.
Yeah,
It was a baseline fest, right? It was one
yeah,
of the best
slugfest.
baseline slugfest that I've ever seen. But
Yeah,
again, you're playing a guy with the exact same mindset as Medvedev, standing far behind the baseline, long strokes. You got to mix it up. I mean, there's no reason to just continue to try and hit through Alexander Zverev, who has two of the best ground strokes in the game right now.
yeah,
So I think Sinners he's shown the signs. I have no doubt he's gonna sneak a couple slams in, if not more, over the course of his career. But we just got to start seeing the variety and the tennis IQ showing through, and not reverting to that habit of just trying to rip through people.
yeah, definitely. And it was tough to see, especially. I mean, he was clearly struggling with his physical condition. I mean, relatively early in the match. Obviously, tough because I mean the rallies were brutal, and Zverev doesn't give you that much from the back, right? And so it was a tough performance, but yeah, he'll be back. And I mean, honestly, that's kind of brutal. Back to back years at the U.S. Open of brutal losses, right? Like losing to Carlos last year, and then now losing to Zverev. That was tough to see, but he's got a good future moving forward. So we hope Killer Cahill can help him unlock that.
Killer Cahill's the guy for it.
Um, awesome. Maybe if there's nothing else, maybe we transition over into the final topic. What do we call this? We call this caps a lot. There was a lot of cap throughout the course of these 2 weeks that we heard
And
from
accumulated.
and accumulated over various people. And I mean, we just have to set the record straight because there was just a lot of foul language, foul talk being used. So kick us
Yeah,
off.
so yeah, what we're gonna do in this segment is we have collected the top four pieces of cap that we heard over the last couple weeks, and we're gonna go ahead and rank them. But before I do that, I did want to say one thing. I think we would be remiss in a U.S. Open recap to not shout out Big Johnny Isner
Yeah.
for a fantastic singles career and doubles career for that matter. Um, Losing to Michael Moe in the early
Fifth
in the
set.
tournament, I think
Yeah.
second round, fifth set breaker. There's only one way for him to go out. It was fitting in a lot of ways, but uh, you know, phenomenal career. Definitely maximized what he had been given.
Yeah, the same, and also same to his doubles partner for some tournaments, Jack Sock as well, right? Making the move over to pickleball, which is really interesting. But I mean, he's got remarkable hands, so right move for him maybe at this time.
Yep. So without further ado, in no particular order, by the way, let's just say chronological.
Yeah.
Tommy Paul has a higher likelihood of winning a slam than Ben Shelton. Statement number one. Statement number two, Taylor Fritz is better than Ben Shelton. Point blank. Statement number three, Djokovic's imitation of Ben's celebration was, quote, alpha, end quote. Statement number four, Djokovic can take Ben Shelton in a fight. See,
Oh,
how are we? I don't even know where to start.
okay. So we'll go in order of least cap to most cap. I'll say least cap. I'll say Taylor Fritz is better than Ben Shelton. I mean, I won't go as far as to say Taylor Fritz is better than Ben Shelton, but he is the highest ranked American. He's been there longer than Ben. He's had like more consistent results so far than Ben. So while I still think Ben has like more upside than Taylor has right now, and I have a bet with my friend that Taylor will win a Grand Slam in his, or my friend we have a bet that Taylor Fritz on whether or not Taylor is going to win a Grand Slam in his career. I think no. My friend thinks yes. So I'm obviously slightly biased on this, but I'll put that at the top. The second one,
Could I interject for
yeah,
1 second on this
of
one?
of
Just
course,
to lay a little bit more context about why I think this is heavy cap.
yeah,
The context was this was during the Ben Shelton match against Djokovic after Taylor Fritz had lost 6-1, 6-4, 6-4,
yeah,
and Ben played a much closer third set than I
yeah.
think Taylor Fritz will ever play in his life against Djokovic. Um, that's the reason why, you know, I'll let you continue, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to emphasize the fact that in that context, and in the context of the fact that Taylor Fritz has gone to the second, third, and second round of the last three Grand Slams, Australian Open,
Yeah.
French Open, and Wimbledon. By the way, losing to um who did he lose to in Wimbledon in 5 sets? It was a brutal, brutal loss.
I don't. I
I'm
know
gonna pull it up right now.
he beat Taro in the first round. I remember that, and I forget who he was playing in the
He lost to Ymer
Emer. That's
on
Taylor.
grass.
Yeah, Taylor did. Yep.
On grass, guys.
Yeah.
Um, in that, putting that into context and then saying Ben Shelton after getting the quarters of the Aussie Open and semis of Wimbledon is definitively better. It's just, I mean, that's what kind of blew me away about that statement.
It's also like Ben beat Taylor. Or sorry, Tommy and Foe in order to get there.
Exactly. In context of who had the harder tournament as well, Taylor Fritz
Yeah.
beat Steve Johnson, Varias,
Yeah.
Mensik, and Stricker, whereas Ben Shelton
Beat Kashin, I believe, in the first round.
beat
Dominic in the second
Kashin,
round.
Dominic, Karatsev,
Karatsev.
Paul,
Yeah.
Tiafo
Yeah.
consecutively. Are you kidding me? That's not even comparable.
So I'll put yeah. So I personally will put that at the top of my list. The second least cap, I would probably go and say, what was the third thing you said? You said
Djokovic's imitation of Ben's celebration was alpha.
no. There, what was the second thing you said?
That was Taylor Fritz. First one was Tommy Paul versus Ben Shelton likelihood, and then the last one is Djokovic can take Ben Shelton in a fight.
Those three are all like I would say the alpha would probably be the like most cap. I would
Yep,
probably say then the next most cap would be no Ben can take Novak or Novak can take Ben in a fight. Uh, I I
ridiculous.
I don't think that would be the case. And then I'll say the second one would be Tommy. What was it?
Tommy has a better chance of winning a slam than
Tommy
Ben.
has a better chance of winning a Ben than dude. I mean that statement made
That's
me
heavy
laugh.
cap too.
That
Yeah.
that made me laugh so much. I want to put that as the most cap, but I think to me, like about the whole deal about the celebration was just like I didn't. It felt very targeted towards Ben, and I don't care what any of the people on Twitter say. Like Ben wasn't doing. Ben is an energy player who gets himself going. He's been raised in this college environment where you're very
Yep.
passionate, you're just cheering a lot, and that's how you get yourself going, right? And that's how a lot of guys get themselves going as well. And I don't think anything he did to Novak was disrespectful, and
Yep.
I think for Novak to do that, I was just really really surprised at that because it felt so unwarranted and so unnecessary. So I'll put that that just ticked me off a little bit, but and I also just don't view like things like that, right? In terms of like, alpha or beta, like it's just like,
Exactly.
is this action necessary or not? And I just thought it was an unnecessary action. So, but I mean, the one that got me dying was Tommy Paul has a higher chance of winning a slam than Ben Shelton. I mean, again, Tommy's a baller, Tommy's great, all of that. But I just think in terms of pure upside and in terms of needing weapons, we've talked about our philosophy of like you build weapons and that's how you get better results, right? And able to win points. And Ben has more weapons than Tommy. It's just that's just how it is, right? Like physically, his serve is much better. He's much more athletic. Like that's just our stance. So that was my rating. What do you? Let's hear yours.
I think I kind of have to agree with you. So
Okay.
um there might be some ties here though, man, because I just I can't believe people would say such egregious things. I think at the top of the list in terms of heaviest cap were the Djokovic imitation of Ben celebration and Djokovic taking Ben in a fight. I mean, look, if I was a soccer player and I scored a goal on a defender who is 3 inches taller than me and has 25 pounds of muscle on me, I'm not doing this to him where I put a phone to my face and then slam it down on the receiver.
Yeah.
You're going to get decked, you know?
Yeah.
And I think what people don't understand is we're in a generation now where everything's on media. You can get away with a lot of this kind of stuff. But 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if you did that, you would get decked and you'd be in the hospital. Um, so, I think both of them are related and both of them don't make a lot of sense. I think the other aspect of why I didn't like Djokovic's celebration is he didn't even back it up. In the press conference he said, "Oh, I just liked it."
Yeah.
And then he had a
Which seems
very
which seems cap.
it was totally disingenuous. And then he
Yeah.
said, "Oh, after the on court interview, he's talking about how like, oh, thanks to the crowd, like great match, acting all friendly." It's like I get it. It was, like our friend said, it was a high adrenaline moment, but for your instinct to be to basically poke a bear that's bigger than you is, I think, a faulty instinct. And in fact, to me, not indicative of being alpha, but indicative of being just, I mean, instinctually stupid. Like, again, just thinking about our history as a human species, you would you would never do something like that. I mean, it's just blatantly disrespectful. It it made no sense. And again, he didn't back it up. What's he going to do at the like I said, what's he going to do at the end of the match if Ben Shelton confronts him in the locker room, hide behind his trainer? Like, I don't understand how that's an alpha move if you can't back it up. And I also understand this talk of like, it's tennis, so they should be judged on the quality of their tennis. But this is where I'm talking about a higher level of thinking. I'm not talking about the tennis court. I'm talking about instincts. In a high adrenaline moment,
Yeah.
your instinct should not be to make fun of someone else or to copy their celebration. Just philosophically.
Yeah. So I actually will go as far like I just firmly believe like settling differences like via that type of confrontation is never the right move in general. And I think the idea of potentially you never know how someone's going to react in that situation,
Yep.
right? And that's why I think it's like it's just not a good move, even if Novak could somehow fight Ben, right? Like it's just not a good move. It's unnecessary to like provoke. Like if you have a problem, like use your words and say, "Hey, man, like maybe I didn't appreciate what you said," or something, or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it also goes to like what your definition of alpha is too, right? There are a lot of people in today's day and age define alpha as being loud, showboating, doing things like Djokovic did, being arrogant. And I think my definition is really different. I look at like the Stoics as alphas, people who do not show emotion and actually are highly masculine. And I don't think doing what Djokovic did was masculine at all. I think it was very emotional and irrational. So That's my take on it. If anything, the person who was alpha was Ben Shelton in the press conference after, who said that imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and just took it as, a positive, which I mean, to me, that is a winner's mentality. He
Yeah.
realized that the only reason Djokovic reacted like that because he was tight as fuck. If Djokovic lost that third set, Ben Shelton turns on some 149s. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. So I think Ben recognized that he did push Djokovic to the limit. And
Yep.
again, we're looking at Djokovic's results this tournament. There aren't many people who took him to a breaker. Ben was one of the few people who did. So
Yep.
I don't care if, Taylor Fritz had 11 break points. One break is more valuable than 11 break points. And Ben did that twice in a set.
Yeah, no, I mean it was super mature response by Ben, saying like imitation is the greatest form of flattery. I think, yeah, he's got the right mentality. Just focus on yourself, focus on what you need to do in order to beat Novak in the next time they get a chance, or at least do better than you did this time. I think all this being said, it's awesome to see tennis get this type of coverage, right?
Yep.
Because I mean, Twitter was blowing up with the celebration. All things being aside, like celebration alpha, all of that aside, I absolutely love the Ben Shelton celebration. I think
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
so boop boop, dude. We locked in, baby. We dialed in. So the celebration goes hard, but yeah, everything. I'm not sure I'd do that. To someone, maybe one of our friends,
For
but
sure.
they,
Oh yeah, I can think of someone in particular.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and just another thing to shout out Ben for is he literally improved during the course of that match. I think that's another thing that
yeah,
people discount. His fitness is another thing that people discount. I mean, this is a guy who wanted to be put in the afternoon session so that he could play in the most humid, brutal conditions against, guys like Tiafoe, guys like Djokovic. I think Djokovic got the benefit of the doubt getting to be on the night session on Ash on a slower court in cooler conditions. But Ben still showed that he can grind. He's worked on his slice over the last 6 months since the Australian Open. He's worked on his volleys in the last 6 months since the Australian Open. So this is a guy who was literally like a three-star recruit as a freshman in high school, guys. He has been on an exponential trajectory, and to bet against him, I think is and say things like Tommy Paul is better than him and Taylor Fritz is better than him is just I think it's pretty ignorant.
yeah. Yeah. His upside is massive, and he's been on a really rapid pace of growth, and it was also awesome to see some of the stuff what his dad was telling him in the coaching box, right? Like that was another aspect of the coverage that was interesting to see this and great to hear this time around, right? Of what the coaches are saying to their players in order to make those fine adjustments. And having his dad as a former player be his coach, yeah, it's only on the up and up from here. But there's more to come. And if anyone listening to this disagrees with us, come holler.
Yeah, fire away. Show up as a guest if you want to defend your
Yeah,
opinions.
absolutely. We welcome this type of debate across everything. So yeah, man, just an incredible 2 weeks, and again, it's you can't not be pumped up by listening and by watching some of this stuff, and I'm certainly pumped up for the Asian swing. So we got more tennis left in the year, which is awesome.
Oh yeah, we're ready to go. And
Cool.
then, of
And
course, what we're all looking forward to is the crown jewel in November with the World Tour Finals. I think we'll
yep,
have to do an episode at some point about who we think is going to make it in those seven and
yep,
eight spots.
yep, absolutely. For the rest of you, we'll catch you again on episode 12. Peace.
Peace.